One of the immense privileges I have of being a minister is being able to walk with families through planning the funeral of a loved one. When I was first ordained, this used to involve going to visit a family with a notebook, asking questions about a person until a picture began to emerge. During COVID, this had to change because suddenly being able to gather in a living room was changed with gathering in a Zoom room. Or being on the phone, it became more normal for planning a family funeral. So I also then had to have a more structured way of asking my questions and not simply letting a family talk and then kind of prodding and kind of drawing out information in different ways. And so I produced a document that I call my 20 questions document, one of the questions that I asked and still ask, even though we've obviously moved back into meeting families face to face. It was asking the question, who else was family in that person's life? What I meant by that was that sometimes in a person's life, you have family who are not really officially family, but because of the ways in which they interact and treat one another, they become family, even if they're not blood relatives. As we come to one of Jesus' I am statements in John's Gospel, I am the resurrection and the life, it proved difficult if we didn't first of all set that statement in its proper context. Context within a family. A family who Jesus knew well, Mary, Martha and their brother Lazarus. It was a relationship that mattered to Jesus. It was important to him. And in the midst of escalating hostility, these were people who had shown him welcome, given him space away from it all. This was a family that Jesus loved. So perhaps it's a surprise that when Jesus says that he's the resurrection and the life, it's within the context of this story of grief, pain and loss. One of the things that we can often struggle with when we're called to follow Jesus is that we know the gospel is a story of God doing all things well. We then often get confused that he doesn't do all things easily. While we have the immense privilege of addressing God as Father, it doesn't mean he'll lead us to a life full of ease and comfort. We're often called to walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And so in John 11 we find that Lazarus is not well, but upon hearing the news, Jesus doesn't immediately set off for Bethany. He waits where he is for another 2 days. It serves as a helpful reminder that God's ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not ours. They are much better. And eventually Jesus and the disciples set off for Bethany after Jesus has told them all that Lazarus has died. Upon arrival, we hear that Lazarus has been in the tomb for 4 days. Jesus is leaving us in no doubt that Lazarus is dead. The tomb is sealed. The full stop on Lazarus' life has been put in place. And it's Martha who comes to Jesus and says to him, Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. Yet even as she says this, she knows exactly who Jesus is. She knows that he need only ask and that God will give it to him. And Jesus responds to her and tells her brother will rise again. At this, Martha says to Jesus, well, I know that he'll rise again in the resurrection on the last day. To which Jesus responds, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. But he then asks Martha a question after he said this. Do you believe this? Martha, in the light of your pain and your grief, do you believe this? Martha, in the midst of the mourning, do you believe that something else might be happening? That even Lazarus, who is dead, might live. She says to Jesus, I believe that you're the Christ, the Son of God, who's coming into this world. Martha knows what the future will hold. She's able to see Jesus exactly as he is. He is the Christ, the Messiah, who is now here, and the world will be forever changed. There's a part of her that cannot yet understand that who Jesus is not simply a future hope, but also a present reality. As the passage continues, we find that Jesus weeps. He sees the pain of Mary and Martha, the rest of the friends and family who are mourning the loss of Lazarus. We find him to be our most feeling friend. But these tears symbolise more than simply sadness. It is Jesus' pain as the Creator, grieving the state of the world as the intrusion of sin and death become ever more apparent. He's feeling in that moment as tears streak his cheeks, the violation, disintegration of the way things were meant to be. What we find as the passage begins to draw to its conclusion is that Lazarus is called out of the tomb, unbound and raised to new life. Turns out that full stop was not what they thought it was, but simply a comma. It's enough to force the chief priests and the Pharisees to gather the council, make plans for Jesus to be put to death himself, and begin making plans and preparations to see Jesus placed into a tomb. What we must realise is that when Jesus says he's the resurrection and the life, it is first and foremost a promise of what is yet to come. When we know and trust him, that promise rings true. Death is not the end. And we find that Jesus is always writing better stories than we could ever pen ourselves. Martha and Mary found that to be true now. But the resurrection of Lazarus pointed to one that was in the not too distant future. As Jesus goes to the cross, where the authorities think that they've silenced him, instead he vanquishes sin and death and rises on the third day, because God is always writing better stories than we could ever pen ourselves. With the resurrection our future, as those who have repented and believed in the truth that Jesus brought, is secure. We trust in the one who declared himself to be the resurrection and the life. It is a promise not only for now, but for our future as well.